Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first live Q&A session for the Tech for Good, the role of ICT in achieving the SDGs. This week's expert Q&A will be with Dorothy Gordon, Chair of the UNESCO Information for All Programme and the lead faculty of this course. I am Sandra, the course TA, and I will be moderating this 30-minute session. We have had some great questions this week, and I've selected a few for Dorothy to answer. Hello, Dorothy. Welcome to this week's Q&A.
Hello, Sandra.
Hi.
Good to be on, and I'm forward to meeting the students.
Fantastic. Excellent. So our first question is, because developed countries already have such high rates of ICT adoption, what types of digital divides do they face, as opposed to perhaps the more obvious divides faced in developing countries? Also, what kind of challenges for sustainable development?
Well, I think that's a brilliant question. What we observe, first of all, let me say that every country differs. It's contextual. But I want to bring up a few examples that will show the nature of the challenges. The first thing, let's use the US. And I attended a meeting to discuss the homework divide. And the homework divide exists because schools have moved to platforms. So your homework is sent to you on the platform. Parents receive text messages on their mobile phones or other kinds of messages on mobile phones about the rest of their kids. But the most important thing is each night, kid needs to be online in order to do their homework. And in one of the most affluent areas in the US, that is California, there's still a lot of children whose parents have never been and who don't own computers. Excuse me. They don't own computers. So then how do they do their homework? And so a very interesting project in California, near the Rancho Mirage area, was to actually bring parents in, give them the information, make these devices available, as well as special arrangements so that they could have bandwidth at home, or every 5 homes, there would be a bandwidth location, somewhere where the kids could go and do their homework. So that's an example of a divide that exists within a very rich country, but for groups of people where historically it's been difficult for them to access these technologies, and currently their income levels do not make this a priority. Then we have the situation of people who are old, those who were born before computers, as they often say in Africa. But we have those also in the Western world. And they now have access to services using computers that they are totally unused to. So if they don't figure out, if special programs are not put in place, that means you actually cut perhaps the group that is most in need, older people, you cut them off from the possibility of e-government services. Then we also have language divides that continue to exist all over the world, depending on the composition of the population. So you'd say, still taking the US, that most people in the US would probably either speak English or Spanish. There are other languages who reside within the US, but who very often cannot find content which is suitable to their needs. So I'm speaking to you this evening, this morning, or this afternoon, depending on where you are, from the UK, where they've had to put in place a lot of programs in so-called minority languages to ensure that people can access key government services. So I think that the main point that one has to grasp is that as government services, educational services, health, which is part of the government services, as all of these things move online, if you are not already caught up, you're going to be on the wrong side of the divide, not only for normal digital access, but also in terms of key services.
That's very interesting, Dorothy. Yes,
Can I add another bit?
Yeah, go.
I think that one of the things that I found very interesting and where we have had slightly different approaches is the density of the settlement. So we have two countries, say Canada and Australia, where we have vast countries where we have concentrations of people in urban areas, but there are still people living out in the more remote locations. How do we make sure that they actually have access to bandwidth? And in Australia, they have a huge national fiber project, which is supposed to link everybody in Australia. I haven't been there and I haven't checked, but you can look it up. I think it's a very interesting example. And then in Canada, it's been not much of a national project, but community by community working to get this to happen. So you could be, even in the US, which is seen as a leader when it comes to tech, you could be living in the US, but you could be living on your farm in a remote area and you want to get bandwidth. And so you say, okay, I'm going to invest and put all the infrastructure necessary to deliver bandwidth to my ranch, to make the arrangement, make it happen. And you could find that legally in your state, you are not allowed to do that because the rights are with the big providers and they will decide whether or not you can put up a network. So you can see that it's very complicated and nothing should be taken for granted. If you are in policy, you need to look at all of these things. If you decide that in order to get a pension, you must register online and you update 3 months or every year or something, you could automatically be taking a whole lot of people off that service. So each time you have to do the analysis and figure how do you do the remedial training or make alternative arrangements. There's so many aspects that have to be looked at. I hope that has helped.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, for answering that question so elaborately. So the next question we have, which is very interesting also, is can you tell us why is race and ethnicity, as opposed to nationality, why race and ethnicity are mentioned as categories for data disaggregation?
Yes, of course, we also disaggregate by country and nation. But one of the most important concepts that people have to think of and keep in mind is intra-country divides. That means the divides that exist within your national population. So what we find, I'm trying to think of a good country to use, but probably it's a sensitive topic, so I won't pick on any particular country. But let us say that race often maps to income. And when race obviously maps to income, we know that income also affects access. So in line with what I said, we always have to make sure that policies are not creating or accentuating existing divides. When it comes to ethnicity, I think the most interesting dimension here is multilingualism. Which languages do we find on the net? Is there a dominance of certain languages? And how does that affect people who perhaps may be literate in an alternative language or maybe more at ease in an alternative language? So they wouldn't go online because they are more comfortable in an alternative language and they are not finding the content in the language that they are at ease with. The other thing we have to think of course, is who is creating the content. Is the content being created by an individual that understands the dynamics of your particular group and the concerns of your particular group. We have other things which are a little higher level, and perhaps we'll get more into that as the course progresses. But we look at things like algorithms. Is the algorithm that is doing the facial recognition designed to be able to see a brown face or a white face or a black face? And it's very interesting. I think it does come up later in the course that if you're in China, algorithm recognize a Chinese featured face easier than a white face. But if you're in the US, it tended to recognize a white male face easier than it would any other alternative. And a lot of work has been done on that particular aspect of things to correct this. But there are many other things which are there that need to have our attention focused on in order to overcome this. I think that we are a diverse community globally, and we need to design for that diversity. And when we are developing policy, we need to be aware of the differences between communities that may necessitate an adaptation of the solution.
Thank you again, Dorothy, for answering that very interesting question. Our third question is, how can civil society play a more active role in the policy-making process to support reaching the SDGs in democracies such as India, where such stakeholders are excluded from this process?
Wow, I never expected that question to come from India, because they have perhaps the most active and engaged group of civil society organizations around the topic of technology. And I'll give you an example. When Facebook wanted to launch basics in India, there was a massive mobilization of civil society organizations that not only carried out advocacy with the general population, but they also made very clear arguments to government in roundtable meetings and other multi-stakeholder meetings in how this was interfering with key agreed concepts such as internet universality. Because that particular program was going to give a different, it was basically going to give people access to the internet just through Facebook. So Indian civil society organizations have been very engaged. And in fact, when we meet as civil society players on the global scale, the Indian civil society organizations are often in a mentoring role. They know a lot about what's happening. But what I think will be useful to you is just to share with you how civil society organizations get involved with policy. So if we take it from the base stage, the first thing is identifying the issue and why the issue matters. And then to carry out advocacy so that more people understand the issue and why the issue matters. Then we have the identification of key decision makers. Not all of those decision makers may be at the top level of government. There may be other related stakeholders that are very important, those key stakeholders, and they carry out advocacy and education with those stakeholders. At the same time, you see a lot of media engagement. We have the traditional media, such as radio, TV, newspapers, etc. But more and more advocacy is carried out online using social media. So you'll see a lot of civil society organizations, very departments for their social media, and they have top experts managing their social media so that they do not have midnight tweets, which are difficult to understand, and the messaging is very consistent. So even if you want to set up your civil society organization, if you're in India, two of you can set up your organization informally and start figuring out what to do about an issue. But if you were in Uganda, for example, that more of a challenge, or in Tanzania, because what I understand is in those countries, they have now put a tax on social media. And if you want to register even a blog, you have to go and register a company. So it depends on where you are located. It's very difficult to give a blanket response. So I focused more on India because the questioner came from India. But I personally know many very active civil society organizations in India that are doing a great job in terms of engaging with policy. The thing is that the policymaker is generally open to learning more about an issue. And if it can be shown to be something that is in the national interest, I think in general, they are open to it. There, for example, the other example I can give is the example of Aadhaar, which is the national identification solution that is currently being used in India. Last week, or perhaps 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, there was a Supreme Court ruling on Aadhaar in terms of how it can be used. And that was the result of extensive lobbying by civil society organizations, and eventually they took the case to court. So both sides won, I believe, in that particular court case because Aadhaar remains. However, there's mentions of Aadhaar which were causing concern from certain civil society partners, which included the privacy and then the fact that you were kind of obliged to join whether or not you wanted to. So those were addressed in that case. And I'm sure that if people search under Aadhaar, they'll see many useful elements of how to conduct a campaign.
Brilliant. Nicely answered again, Dorothy. Really, really enjoyed that answer. So the fourth question we have is, with the rapid and dynamic growth of new technologies and other digital trends comes challenges such as cybercrime and digital corruption. Can you tell us the best ways to address safety issues as we're becoming more and more dependent on digital services within our daily lives?
This is a very tough question. There are so many levels at which we can answer level out of the way. I think it's very important when we look at national policy that we do not grow monopolistic systems where all of our technology, key technology, is dependent on a single provider or a single solution. Because as we see in nature, diversity breeds resilience. If you recall some years back, all the whole health system in me was ground to a halt because there was a virus on a particular kind of software. People's operations had to be postponed, and in fact, it's believed that many people died, the full extent of which we would never know because some people simply didn't go to hospital because the hospital systems were down and the hospitals weren't functioning. I think that we have to build in the redundancy to such systems so that even if a particular solution is under attack, some alternative solution can actually come into play. But in the first place, don't design your solution in such a way that you could be vulnerable to that kind of attack. Second, all of us have to become far more security conscious. And there are efforts underway, some of which are being supported by civil society organizations, actually, to hold companies accountable for when there are security breaches. Because the belief is that far more will be paid to security by big companies that are providing services if when there was a security breach, they would be held accountable for people losing all their data, etc., etc. So we'll see how those things go. But I think that it is important, if that some of the people who are listening to us are actually providing solutions, and you need to design knowing that you could be held accountable for a security breach. And so you should put in place all those steps that will allow security to be constantly upgraded. But that also means that from the beginning, you design with privacy and security in mind. And this is now a bigger issue than ever before, because we have the Internet of Things. And with the Internet of Things, that means that there's a wide range of devices that are Internet enabled. Some of them come with default settings that make them incredibly easy to hack. And so all of this is changing as awareness is growing. And what I would say is, you as an individual, you need to understand which of your devices are actually Internet enabled in your home. Very often it starts with the modem. It's got a default that any hacker could hack. And probably even your teenager could hack. You need to be sure that it's not on the default. You need to do the research to find out more about how you can make yourself secure. And in my capacity as the UNESCO chair for the Information for All program, we are seeing that more and more we are putting in the dimension of security, our digital literacy programs. You'll see also in school that children are being taught more about security issues online than they were about 5 years ago. So it definitely is a big issue. And luckily for us, we have a module which is dedicated to this particular topic. I'm sure you'll learn more.
Thank you, Dorothy. So our fifth and final question is, how can small countries seek to benefit from the digital dividend while meeting the demands of their citizens?
Well, it's difficult to answer that question because the definition is small. And if we look at small countries, one of the leading countries in the world when it comes to digital is actually Estonia. And I was fortunate enough to tour the room where they have their cabinet meetings and to meet with their former president, who was behind their digital transformation. And in Estonia, which is a very small country, every citizen has their digital ID. And that digital ID is linked to so many services. They have very broadly 100% literacy. And it made it easier, perhaps, for them to make that transformation. Also, I remember them joking with me that it's extremely cold in Estonia, so there's nothing, you have nothing to do in the winter except get online and learn how to code and keep developing more and more interesting solutions. So I don't think it's dependent on the size of the country. But if talking about a small, perhaps landlocked country that historically has not been on the top of the wealth tables, let's look at Rwanda. And you will see that Rwanda is really making a name for itself when it comes to digital, because under the leadership of their President Paul Kagame, who I understand forced all his ministers to get online, because the agenda for cabinet meetings would be sent out online. So if they didn't get online, they couldn't see it. And who has been doing so much in terms of providing solutions, government solutions to the citizens. The challenges that were faced included making sure that broadband access is consistent across Rwanda. And Rwanda has a very challenging terrain. It's very hilly. So many wireless solutions or even WiMAX and other solutions that require line of sight would have been a challenge. And so they've had to be very creative to make sure that they blanket the whole country equally. And I think that's still going. So the point I'm trying to make is it's not related to size, not necessarily related to how rich you are as a country, but it is very related to leadership and the willingness to look at what would it actually take for us to make that transformation, and then going systematically and addressing those issues. So there are many people who may not be literate in a particular country. If you put gun service on X, how will they understand what they need to do? But now we have voice recognition systems that allow us to make that something which is completely in audio if we wish. So there are many different solutions to many different problems, but the main thing is there has to be a conscious decision that this is something that we need to do, and everybody needs to be mobilized behind that mission or decision and to look at the challenges in a very systematic way. And one of the things about technology, I see we have just 4 minutes left, so I should round up. But one of the things about technology that we have to take into account is the law of unintended consequences. And so in all contexts, you may have thought of a solution, but then you'd realize that it had some impact in areas that you had not thought of, and perhaps those impacts may not be desirable. So you have to figure a way out of it. So Sandra, I hope I've answered your questions. I don't know if there's one more you want to sneak in before we end, or if there's one you would like me to talk a little more about.
Well, I was interested when we were talking about civil society and how they can participate more in the policy process. And you mentioned Uganda. Was it Uganda that put on a tax or a fee for blogs, or was it?
Yes, yes.
And I find that absolutely shocking, because isn't that like a violation of freedom of expression?
It's very interesting because I'm actually coming out of a session last week, the Freedom of Information, FIFA Africa, where I was able to interact with activists from Uganda and Tanzania who are actually under a lot of pressure at the moment. And somebody was saying that the leadership in Uganda has presented this as an essential revenue mobilization initiative, because they need more money from the taxes, and because the informal sector is very large, they haven't been able to tax the informal sector. But what has actually happened is that poorer people who have less income, have been forced offline, because apparently you pay that tax daily, and it doesn't matter. Maybe you were very busy all day and you could only get online at 22 hours, you will still pay the same tax as somebody who got online at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. And what's happening, this is all hearsay because I have not checked this with the government of Uganda. I'm reporting on what activists were telling me. And they're saying it's had huge impact on, because as we know globally, women are usually lower down when it comes to the wealth ladder, or higher up when it comes to the poverty ladder. And so they had less disposable income to start with. And so now, while they were beginning to engage around issues affecting their society, now they are opting out and saying, well, I need to keep my children alive. I can't be paying so much money just for talking about things. I need to keep my children in school and fed and clothed. So it's a complicated situation.
yeah, definitely a debate that I hope we'll be able to discuss further in another occasion or
Yes.
another time. But yeah, that was awesome. Thank you very much for.
And I hope that the course participants are going to enjoy themselves. You've got a wonderful range of faculty on the issues. Thank you so much.
And thank you to everybody who submitted the questions. Very interesting questions. I'm really sorry that we weren't able to answer all of the questions at this time, but hopefully throughout the course we will be able to engage through the discussion boards, and feel free to email me at any time. Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you, Sandra.
See you soon. Bye-bye.